I actually have a folder for Keyoptrix. I'm going to cd into it, and then we're going to go ahead and just paste that line, and it will get clone everything. If we ls, now we see that it is there. So let's cd into that folder, the bad word folder, and we'll ls. And now you can see that there is just the C file here in the README. So what we're going to do is we need to install this libssl dev. So we're going to say apt install and then libssl-dev like this, hit enter, and then just hit enter because it says yes already. This will take just a second to install. And then once it does this, we're going to use a tool, looks like, called GCC, which GCC is a compiler. So if you've never used C or are familiar with C, we have a C file, but this isn't ready to use. We have to compile that C file in order to actually use it. So that's what we're doing here, is we're downloading a little bit of stuff to actually be able to compile that. GCC is built in, and we just needed some other things additionally. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say GCC, and typically you say -o for the output, so we can call it whatever we want. We'll just call this open, and then we'll just specify the file. You can start typing it and then tab out. And then it says this L crypto, which is important. Hit enter, okay, and then hit ls. And you see now in pretty green lighting up and saying, hey, we're executable. We have our executable, right? We have our script that we can run. So we could say /open and run it. And you can see in here all the different options that this runs against. So you remember when it was brute forcing, the last one, when we saw the trans to open was kind of doing a brute force. In theory, this is what it could do as well, but here we actually have to pick a return address based on our machine. So we're going to look at the usage. I always like to do the application without any usage to see what the usage is. And we need to use target box, which is one of these down here. We need to select a port. Maybe it says for SSL connection. We're not going to be using an SSL connection, so don't worry about that. And then a -C number. And it says use range 40 to 50 if you don't know. So our syntax is going to look something like /open, one of these offsets that we're going to pick. And then it's going to be a -C, probably 40, with the box IP address in between. So how do we find what we're looking for? Well, I'm going to cheat just a little bit and tell you guys to scroll down, 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 down. And if we look at 6B here, remember, we were up against Apache 1.3.20. See, enumeration comes into play big time. So Apache 1.3.20. Now there are two we can run against. I'm picking this one. I believe it's the more stable one. So we could pick either one, but I would choose B. I think A doesn't work all the time. So let's choose B here. And Apache 1.3.20 is the indicator. And again, Red Hat Linux, so that's another indicator. So let's copy this so we don't forget it. And we're just going to scroll down and we're going to say, hey, /open, and we're going to paste that 0x6b. And then we're going to run this against the IP address because it said box was next. So 134. And then remember we had to give a -C of 40. So that is the syntax. Sometimes you have to follow along, and it's I don't think most of them are as confusing as this. I don't, when you say this is confusing, I would just say it's pretty lengthy for a exploit because you have to go through all the different offsets here to find the offset and actually fire this off. But you know, you have the opportunity here to actually be able to read usage and just understand your way through it. So once you get this little syntax and all this part down, it's really not that bad. So to check off the list, we've got the target, we've got the box IP address. We don't need the port because we're not running against SSL. We're just going to run this against port 80, and then we're going to run -C of 40. So let's go ahead and try to fire that off and see what happens here. And this may just take a second. Okay, it says it's spawning a shell. Now we wait for the SUID. Let's scroll up just a little bit while we're waiting here to see. So it looks like it sent the shell code and it spawned a shell. And it says, hey, we have no job control in this shell. And then it has a shell here, bash 2.05. That is a shell. And then it's going in and it's doing some wgets. Now, if this is able to get out to the internet, it's going to go ahead and try to do wgets against these. It's going to keep downloading and it's going to get the response here. Okay. And now it says we wait for the shell because it saved this .c file here. And let's see if maybe we already have a shell. Who am I? Root. Look at that. So it looks like it downloaded something and allowed us to maybe privilege escalate here. And let's say hostname. Okay. So we've gone through and we've rooted this machine with Metasploit, and now we've gone through and rooted this machine with the manually downloaded exploit. So there's two options. You're going to find out that Metasploit is a more robust and popular option, especially as a penetration tester. Now, there is a common misconception or thought process put out there by certifications. The OSCP, for example, doesn't let you use a lot of Metasploit, only one instance of Metasploit on their exam. So everybody thinks, man, I really shouldn't use Metasploit. But you're going to see in this course how useful it really is and how robust it is. And if you talk to a penetration tester, they're going to use the best tools available to them. The certifications out there that do that are just making it harder to pass the exam intentionally than they are, for practicality. This course is all about practicality. So from here, now that we've exploited it manually, let's talk about a couple things that we look for in post. So post being post exploitation, and we're going to cover this over and over and over again. We're not going to get into it fully right now. I just want to give you an idea as to the thought process. So the first thing to think about is, what is our IP address? We could say ifconfig if it'll allow us to. It depends on what kind of shell we're in. And see, this one is a weird shell. We could try IPA. It's still not going to be found. If we try some commands like arp or route, I doubt they're going to be found right now either. But we want to look at like the routing table, the arp table. We want to see if this machine is what's called dual homed. And you're going to learn more about that when we get into the pivoting. But if this has like two NICs, and we're on one network and the NIC is on a second network that we never saw before, then maybe we can do something called pivoting and move into that new network. But we would be able to identify who the machine's talking to with an ARP table or a route. We could also look at like sudo privileges. So we could say something like sudo-l, but we're root, so we can run as everybody. So if a sudo user, as we talked about in Linux lessons, sudo user is able to run commands as elevated, but here as root, we're obviously already elevated. So other things that we can do, we can cat what's called the etc password file. Now, this is very misleading because the etc password file used to be the password file. Now it just holds a placeholder. So you could see all the users that are on this computer, root being this one. There's a lot of built-in users here. But if you always scroll down to the bottom and you start at the 500s, that's where your users start. So there's actually two users on this computer as well. One's named John, the other's named Harold. So we look at these users and we say, okay, well, there's no password in this password file, but there used to be. Back in the day, there used to be. That's why they call it this. And now they moved it to this placeholder of an X. And what we can do is we can come in here and we can say, hey, cat etc shadow. And now you see the hashes are in here. So these hashes are what the X is placeholding for. We can actually combine both of these files with the tool and go offline and try to crack these. We'll work on that later on in the course. But just for now, like getting your wheels spinning on as to what we can do with root level access. We need to start enumerating again, looking at files on the computer, seeing what what's out there and what we can do with it. But we'll get into post-exploitation techniques and thought process as we go through the Active Directory portion of the course, because I think it plays hand in hand. And we could talk about password cracking there and how to attack some of this stuff. But there will be a password cracking video on Linux as well when we get into the post-exploitation phase of this. But that's really it for now. So we've got the shadow. We could take this offline, try to crack it. We can enumerate files. We can try to, break into user folders and see what they've got in there. Maybe they've got password files stored in there, etc. So from here, we have rooted this machine twice. We rooted it with Metasploit, we rooted it manually, and now we can start moving on. I do want to show you a few more attacks. So here's what's going to happen over the next few videos. We're going to talk about brute force attacks really quick on SSH. We're going to talk about credential stuffing. We're going to revisit that concept that we talked about in information gathering. And then we're going to look at our notes. And we're just going to compare notes and see where we're at with findings and everything else. After that, we're going to get into what I like to call the mid-course capstone, which is going to allow us to do a bunch of exploitation against a bunch of machines, and it should be really fun. So, end of spiel again. I will catch you over in the next video as we talk about brute force attacks. In a previous video, we discussed SSH and that it's really not always that much of a low-hanging fruit. So we've got SSH here, and say we want to attack it. Now there are 3 reasons we're going to do this, and this is from a realistic perspective. If we see SSH on an assessment, we're going to try to brute force against it or use weak or default credentials. And we're going to do that because 1, we're going to test password strength. 2, we're going to see if we can get in with a weak password or default password. And if we can, that also attests to password strength, correct? And 3, we're going to see how well the blue team performs. Do they catch us? Do they see us brute forcing? This should be something that should alert when it is being performed, but you would be surprised how often it does not. So during a pen test, I am as loud as possible. This is not a red team assessment where we're trying to be quiet. This is a pen test where we are as loud as possible, and we are hoping to be caught sometimes, just told to tone it down a little bit. Hey, we're seeing you. Can you be more quiet? And we just want to be caught sometimes so we can give kudos in a report and say, hey, you saw us scanning here, and kudos to you, but you didn't see us scanning here and here. So this is how we really help fine-tune a blue team and help fine-tune a client as well, is being loud sometimes. So we're going to practice being loud today, and we're also going to practice brute force attacks. And we have the perfect opportunity to do that with an SSH port being open on this machine. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a tool called Hydra, and then I'll show you the Metasploit way as well. So Hydra is a brute force tool. So the syntax for Hydra is going to be this. We're going to say Hydra, and then we're going to give a -L for the user that we're going to be utilizing. In this case, I want to attack root. And then we're going to give a P for the password list. So if we wanted to use a password list with L, we can just say L. But here we're going to say P for the password list. And then we're just going to say user share wordless Metasploit. And I'm just going to double tab in this folder so you can see how many words are actually in here. There's quite a bit of word lists, and you can space, and it has word lists for all different kinds of things built in, and these are all over Kali, so it's good to know your folder locations, but user share word list is one that we'll use quite a bit. And what we're going to do is we're going to utilize an attack with these Unix passwords here. So we have a Unix users and Unix passwords. We're going to utilize the Unix password list and just try to brute force with that. So we'll say Unix passwords, something like that. And then we're going to need to specify what we're attacking. So we are attacking SSH like this, and our IP address of our machine that we're attacking. on port 22. And then we need to have a certain amount of attempts or threads at once, and we're going to limit that to 4. And then I'm going to do a capital V for verbosity, just because I want to see the user attempts flow through so that we can actually see what's going on here. So once you got the syntax ready to go ahead and hit enter. And you're going to see that it's starting to attempt root login password with all these weak passwords here. And hopefully it might find something. But let's go ahead and open up a new terminal here. And we're going to just make this a little bigger. And I'm going to load up Metasploit as well. And we're going to run the same exact thing in Metasploit. But I think it's good to know multiple frameworks and multiple tools to perform the same task. So here we're going to search for something like SSH. And this is going to be an auxiliary module. So we'll just scroll up. And we're going to look for something like SSH login. Perfect. Login check scanner. And make sure we don't have anything else. And that looks good to me. So let's go ahead and take this SSH login. And we're going to go ahead and say use options. And now we have kind of our brute force options here. Let me make this a little bigger so it's prettier. So we've got a brute force speed from 0 to 5, 5 being the fastest. Try blank passwords, no, no, no. We can set a hard password and we could set a hard username. We could set a user and password file, a user as password file. Again, we can have a password file as well. So we have a lot of different options here that we can utilize. But we're going to go ahead and do the same kind of thing. We're going to say set username, and we're just going to say root. And then we're going to say set pass file. And similar to what we just used, we're going to say user share wordless Metasploit. And then we're going to say Unix passwords. And that should set the pass file. And then we just need an R host as well. Set R host, and we'll say 192.168.57.134. Say options one more time. And you can see that we've got our password file set. We've got our R host set. We've got our R port on 22. Threads is 1, username root, and we should be good to go. Now we could set multiple threads here. We could set threads to like 10. This is really going to amp it up. I mean, this should be detected in a second, but we're going to try to run it. And we could set, actually, let me control C. Let's set verbose to true as well, just so you could see that it's actually working. Set verbose to true, and then we're going to run this. And then it's going to attempt different credentials here, and it'll say, hey, I found it, and it'll light up green, and then we'll know it's good. So this is actually going kind of slow, surprisingly. And you can see here that we are at attempt 112, 116. So this is also going slow. And we do not have a successful attempt or login. I actually don't believe that there's going to be one, but you never know. I believe I remember taking this offline and trying to crack the password, and it wasn't any kind of weak password. So you can let your brute force run if you want to go with it, but I'm going to go ahead and kill mine. And that's it for this video. So from here, we're going to talk about a similar methodology called credential stuffing, which we've already talked about before, except we're not brute forcing, but we're using common knowledge to our advantage. So we'll talk about a little bit of credential stuffing in the next video. Let's talk again about credential stuffing, and while we're at it, we're going to talk about password spraying. Now, I realize we talked about this earlier in the course with breach parse and we leak info, but I do think that hammering concepts over and over and how important they are does help for information retention. So again, if we look at this example here, what is credential stuffing? Well, it's just injecting breached account credentials in hopes of account takeover. So if you look at the compromised server here in the upper right-hand corner, we pull down usernames and credentials. And we get these from leaks like the LinkedIn link or the Equifax link or whatever of those have come out recently. We get these leaked credentials. And we grab these databases, we search through them like we did with BreachParse or like we can with WeLeakInfo, and we get these stolen credentials. And we take these credentials and we try to pass them to the site login. Now, we could take a look at a real life example of that, which I have pulled up here. And again, this is just an example of the Tesla BreachParse. So we have some usernames and passwords. We have repeat offenders, remember? We also have similar passwords here. But the art of credential stuffing is taking these passwords and these usernames and throwing them at a website. That's all it is. So we're going to throw them at a website and just kind of spray and pray. Now, I just gone ahead and opened up this same Tesla-master. I've only opened up the users and the passwords just for an example of spraying. This video is going to be in theory only. I don't want you attacking Tesla's website. So just take this for example. You can follow all the way up until the point that we actually hit attack if you want to follow along. But for this, please do not attempt an exploit against Tesla. You do not know when the criteria is going to change, and I just don't want you getting in trouble just in case it does. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and go to Firefox. And while we are in Firefox, what I want to do is I want to take a quick pit stop and go to Google. And I want to look up something called Foxy Proxy. So go ahead and do this. Look up Foxy Proxy like this, not Froxy, Foxy Proxy. And go ahead and click on this top one here, the standard. And we're just going to go ahead and install the standard to our Firefox. And this is going to be a useful tool that we'll be using throughout the course. So, okay, we've got Foxy Proxy installed. Now what has happened up in the right-hand corner, we've got this here. You can see Foxy Proxies here, and we can just say, hey, options. And in the options, we're going to add in a proxy over here on the left. And we're just going to call it Burp Suite. And then over here, we've got proxy types. We're just going to leave this at HTTP. And then we're going to give it an address, which is 127.0.0.1. Same thing as before. And again, this is 8080. We'll just hit save. And then we're going to go ahead and close out. And then all we got to do now is click this and click this. And now Burp Suite's turned on. Super simple. So let's go ahead also to our applications. And let's just go up here and open up Burp Suite. And let's test out our proxy and make sure. Ignore the errors. Don't worry about those. We'll just go ahead and hit next and use burp defaults. And I will give you a second here to catch up because I realize that I might be clicking through a little fast. So once you have everything set up like this, what we're going to do is we're just going to make sure our proxy works. So I'm just going to refresh the page and you can see that it worked. So easy on, easy off. That's all we're looking for here. Instead of having to go in the menu and go to preferences and, go through that whole process, all we got to do is click a little button. We can turn it on or off within a couple clicks. So from here, I'm going to turn the intercept off. And we're just going to go ahead and go to tesla.com. And Tesla should look like this when you go to it. In the upper right-hand corner, there is a sign in button. Go ahead and click sign in. And again, this is just a watch and learn exercise. You can follow along up until the point that we fire the attack. There will be opportunities here in very, very soon videos where you actually get to do this and you can practice along. So from here, let's turn on the intercept and let's go ahead and just put a fake email. We'll just do test@test.com and we'll do test as the password and hit sign in. And that intercepts here. So you can see the user equals, or email equals test@test.com and password equals test. We're going to go ahead and just right click this and say send to intruder. And from intruder, what we're going to do is we're going to go to positions in here and then we're going to clear it. All those green go away because it tries to auto select positions for us. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to highlight this here and we're going to say add. And then we're going to highlight this here, and we're going to say add. So we're selecting two different parameters. we're selecting the email parameter, and we're selecting the password parameter. And now we have different attack types up here. The most common that we're going to use is either sniper, but sniper uses one parameter. So we're actually going to use what is called a pitchfork here. And we're going to go ahead and go over to our payloads. And what we're going to do, or what I'm going to do, is I'm going to take this list of users, and I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to paste it. And then on the second one, I'm going to take my list of passwords, and I'm going to paste it. Now, what this is doing, if we go back, payload set 1 is all the usernames. It's going into the first one we set here. Payload set 2, all the passwords, those are all going into here. And we have 30 total counts, meaning what's happening with this pitchfork is payload 1, number 1, is corresponding to payload 2, number 1. So they only run together. So this will run the username and password. These are just the separated users and passwords. This will run this username against this password here. So what we're going to do is just we start an attack, and it just says, hey, this is a demo version of Intruder because you're on community. Don't worry about that. It still runs. It's just a little slower. I'm going to go ahead and hit pause on the attack. Now, there are some interesting things that we can look for. When we're doing this, what we're looking for is a status code change of some sort. Maybe we see 200s here and we want like a 301, which means a redirect. Or we see a significant change in length. That would be a good indicator that maybe we had a successful login. Other items too is that we can click in here and look at the response. And we can say, okay, what did the response say? And if we scroll down, maybe it said something in here about fail login. Okay, we could not sign you in. And we could just take, we could not sign you in like this, copy this, and then we can come back, we'll close this attack, we'll come into options here, and there's actually a grep feature. So we can clear all of these in this little box, and we can just paste this and say, yes, match this here. So watch what this does. So we're gonna start this attack again, and then I'm gonna pause it. And you can know immediately, look at the checkboxes. This means it's showing up in the response, it's grepping it out, it knows immediately that we didn't sign in successfully. So this is an example of a credential stuffing attack. So we're looking for these few different things, a status change, a significant length. Like we're seeing all the same kind of lengths here, but what if it was like 5,000 or 2,000 or 15,000? If the page length changes, there's a good chance that you signed into something and we have a successful login. Same thing here with this. If you can find your error code or what it says and then grep on that, then you can click up here and just sort by that. And you can search for the ones that don't return that and possibly have a login as well. So this is the art of credential stuffing. Now, let's say we wanted to close this out. We want to go back and we want to do password spraying. Well, we're going to go ahead and just clear this out. And if you remember, password spraying is the art of using known usernames without a known password. So we'll just say add here, and we would gather a list of all the possible users that we can think of. We can look at hunter.io, we can look at the breach password list, we can look at LinkedIn and gather people who work there, come up with this big list, and then actually clear, sorry. No, this is right. We'll add these and we'll have all the different users. And then for this, we'll just change the request to like fall of 2019. Or we can set it up to, we could set this up here like fall 2019 exclamation, or whatever the time frame is, or however you want. Or maybe, they work at Tesla, so maybe we'll do Tesla 1 if they have a weak password policy, or 123, or @ or pound. You just try a few of these. The only downside to this is you are most likely attacking Active Directory accounts. When you're attacking Active Directory accounts, you want to be very careful because you could lock them out without even trying. So if you're doing a pen test, the best idea is to ask before you attack, say, hey, how many attempts do you have unsuccessfully before a logout happens or a lockout happens? Because the worst thing you want to do is fire off 10 of these in a row, lock out a bunch of users, and cause a denial of service. That is very, very possible and very, very easy to do. So make sure